Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining our panel today. My name is Sonja Swanson. I will be moderating, and I am a food writer based here in Las Vegas. I'm going to go ahead and have our lovely panelists introduce themselves. We'll start with Jocelyn.
Thank you, Sonja. This is Jocelyn Jackson. I am founder of Justus Kitchen and also the co-founder of People's Kitchen Collective. Both started in the heart of the Bay in Oakland, California, and now operating partially from Las Vegas, Nevada. And I'm just grateful to be here talking about food writing and the creation of culture.
Great. Let's go to Kim next.
Hi, I'm Kim Foster. I'm a writer here in Vegas, and I write specifically about food and the intersection of mental health, sobriety and drug addiction, poverty, family separation, foster care. So that's pretty much my area. I'm really happy to be here with these people to talk about this really important topic.
Great, thank you, Kim. And on to Andy.
I'm Andy Wang. I live in Los Angeles now. I previously lived in New York, but despite never living in Vegas, I've covered restaurants and hotels and nightlife and culture in Vegas for more than 15 years now, because thankfully there's a national audience for that. And right now I primarily write about restaurants for Food and Wine, Rob Report, and Los Angeles Magazine.
Great. I'm so excited to have us all here together virtually. I know all of you individually, so I feel like I'm having tea with some old friends here. So cheers. Good to see you all. And since this is the Las Vegas Book Festival, I thought we could start off by talking about some of the things that we're reading. Well, I was thinking maybe food books or food-related reading, but maybe Andy, do you have any books that you're reading or have read recently that you'd like to share with us?
Sure. Let's see. There's one. I don't know if anybody can see this, but I'm going to hold it up anyway.
Ooh.
It's got all this beautiful pie on it. I mean, I think pie is just important for mental health, at least for me right now.
Yes.
And the thing that I love about this, this is the pie baking book cookbook from Petey's Pie in New York from Petra Paredes. And it's just a pie shop that can turn anything into pie. So if you sort of flip through it, there are savory pies, and there's, you know, a dozen fruit pies and chilled pies and custard pies and chess pies and more than a dozen ways to make pie a la mode. And
amazing.
It's beautiful. And, you know, now, even though like a lot of us are really busy with all these extra, you know, quarantine related responsibilities, we also have all this extra time where we just wait for things, right? And baking is a good thing to do.
Totally. Can you show us that cover one more time?
Yeah, absolutely.
It's so pretty. Oh man, love that.
And pie for everyone. So it's like, look, we need to start yet about the different ways that food can be inclusive, but like I really do believe that like pie is this thing that it's very hard for anyone to dislike, right?
True. So true. So true. Kim, what are you reading these days, or what have you read recently?
Well, I'm revisiting some books that I really love. So my cookbook group, Please Send Noodles, is starting Chinese, right? Starting Chinese food. So I am taking them through, this is Grace Young's classic, Stir Frying to the Sky's Edge. Her book, Wisdom of a Chinese Kitchen, was actually the sort of foundational book for me in terms of how I wanted to be in the kitchen. And so I can never get too far away from Grace's work. So the Cookbook Club is going to be doing this. And while that's happening, I have been doing a deep dive into Fuchsia Dunlop's The Food of Sichuan. And my family is reaping the rewards of that. So that's what I'm doing.
When will you adopt me, Kim, please? Jocelyn, how about you? What's on your bookshelf these days? Oh, can't hear you. Sorry, go ahead and, there we go.
Thank you for that. I appreciate it. I am really excited just about a book that I don't yet have, but this is the publication day. So I want to make sure that I'm highlighting it because it points out something that's really important. And this is going to be poor, maybe quality, but This is Bibi's Kitchen by Hawa Hassan in partnership with Julia Turshen, was part of the co-writing team of that. And I point out Bibi's Kitchen because it highlights this idea that grandmas are cooking around the world and teaching us so much and helping us survive. But one of a recent books that I was made aware of is a Grandmas Around the World cookbook. And there wasn't one Black grandma in it. There wasn't one POC grandma in it. And that's one of those heartbreaks that we can think that the whole world is one color when writing a book. And we're getting to a point where we can explicitly state grandmas and their cooking and their stories of survival and nourishing are important, and they are diverse, and they are needing to be told in an inclusive and intersectional way. So I'm really excited about that one. And the other one I want to point out is How We Show Up, which is not a food book, but it's talking about, it has reflections on People's Kitchen Collective and the work that we do in community organizing. And so food, I call myself a cook activist often because food is the catalyst for community to be built, for there to be attention to beloved community. And she highlights the way that we use our work with food to build community in that way. And I am going to cheat and say one more, which is something that just, this is the little chat book program that we created for the free breakfast that we just held on Saturday. And it is something that is a cook along that we did. And it shows the Black Panther Party's free breakfast legacy and how we are now holding that legacy in as humble a way as we can as we try to gather people together virtually in this particular moment by doing the free breakfast cook along on Saturday. We did a distribution as well that was live and fed school children at DeFremery Park. But it was really sweet to create this little chat book with all of our recipes before we get to our bigger, cookbook and book that we're writing, to really bring that moment together where we may be apart cooking, but when people are posting the pictures of their dishes, we're cooking the same thing together, but apart. And I'm grateful for technology being able to be a bridge for that type of experience to happen and community building to still be possible through food.
Hear, 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 hear. And is that chat book something that people can order online through the PKC website?
Really interesting. Right now, for a limited time, it is on our website. That was another access point. We did free breakfast cook-along bags that we distributed to 200 people on Friday of this past week to prepare for the event on Saturday. But because we knew some people were cooking from India, some people from South Africa, some people from South America, we're like, we need to put this online for a little bit. So it is on our People's Kitchen Collective website for a short time under our secret recipes section.
Ooh, very exciting. I am going to that website right after this call. It's funny that you mentioned Julia Turshen as one of the co-authors on Bibi's Kitchen, because the book that I brought was actually Small Victories by Julia Turshen. I adore her. She is just lovely. She makes cooking so approachable. And I have probably cooked half of the recipes in here, which I don't know about you guys, but usually when I get a cookbook, I cook 10% out of the cookbook and then never do anything with the rest. But for whatever reason, I've just gone through almost all of her recipes, and it's just been something I come back to again and again. Small Victories. The other book that I just finished is it's not really a cookbook. It's a work of fiction. It's called My Year of Meats by Ruth Ozeki, and it's the story of a mixed Japanese woman who is working on a documentary project about the meat industry in America and just the wild ride she encounters and the ways that she, her understanding of meat and the meat industry and how it's sort of culturally mediated changes over the course of the book. And it honestly, parts of it just read really excellent, long form nonfiction. And then parts of it are just really delightful, musings and fictional. So highly recommend My Year of Meats. So that's what I've been reading lately. I also wanted to ask you guys about kind of like food writing more broadly, because I'm sure that we read a lot of things online, not just in magazines, not just books and cookbooks. So I was wondering what kinds of changes that you're seeing in food writing, what things are shifting, evolving, what trends are you noticing? Feel free to jump in, anyone. I see Andy. I'm going to tap Andy here. Andy, what are you noticing in terms of some changes or shifts in food writing?
I mean, I'm seeing this in both books and magazines and newspapers and websites where, especially now with the pandemic and so many restaurants are closing and people are scrambling to figure out other things and people are figuring out new ways to take care of themselves and all the people in their industry, a lot of it has just gotten a lot more personal, right? So personal meaning that in terms of the stories that people are telling through their food and then how those stories there's a lot of people now in pretty much every major city in the world now that have started new food businesses that aren't quite restaurants, right? And a lot of these people who are doing this are people that were maybe didn't have the spotlight before, for whatever reason were marginalized, and now realize that like the world is terrible right now, but the playing field is a little bit more level, and I don't need crazy capital or crazy PR to try to do something. I just need food that tells a compelling story, and I need a social media presence, right? And then on the flip side of it, like the most famous chefs in the world, I mean, here's another book I've been reading. This is the obvious one right now, right? Here's a David Chang book. This is not a cookbook. This is very much a memoir that's about mental health and imposter syndrome, you know, and temper tantrums and growing up and how your perspective changes throughout life. And, you know, and just like whatever, this fight from taking something that was previously obscure or punk rock and wanting to make it mainstream. So I just think that a lot of things are melting down right now, but the driving forces of the stories behind what a lot of these chefs and writers want to do, like they're powerful right now, and those things are not dying.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that conversation about mental health is definitely coming a lot more to the forefront. Kim, do you have any thoughts on this?
On specifically on mental health?
Sure, or anything that you're noticing in terms of shifts or changes in food writing.
Well, I think we're at a place where criticism in general is just really changing. So, you know, criticism in the past was somebody went to a restaurant and then you would say, oh, this is really great, and then, or this really sucks, and then you would write, you know, something about it, and then there would be this sort of, it was consumer driven. You should go here, you shouldn't go there. And I think there was something kind of, there was something inherently unfair about that. And also that that kind of writing just never got to the crux of what the issue is, which is, you know, our concerns now are not just, is this a good place to eat, but, you know, is the staff fairly paid? Who's making a living wage? Where did this food come from? You know, what customers can afford to eat here? How are women and people of color being treated in this organization? Are they being hired in this organization? And these things seem to matter now. The inclusiveness, who can come to this restaurant, is really, really important, I think, to criticism and writing. And I think that's a major change, a major shift.
Mm-hmm. Jocelyn, do you agree? Are you seeing similar shifts in food writing, and what do you think is driving those shifts?
It's really a provocative question and goes in so many different directions right now. And I will answer it in this moment by acknowledging that I am a new food writer. I've been writing about food for years, but I haven't been published. And I'm going to track that change to being a published food writer to the death of a man on the streets by state violence. And that started what we hope is not a trend, but definitely instigated food media to seek out more representation when it comes to Black writers and people of color in general, contributing in a way that is substantial to the food media platform. And it doesn't invalidate our presence, but it does track a particular turn in attention and focus and, quite frankly, accountability. And again, whether it continues or not is still to be seen. But with that platform, I am happy to write things like this was an article that was in Eater recently that I published there, and was very, it was a very challenging piece to write because it was so personal, but it was also a very free and liberated writing process because it was so personal. And that's what I'm grateful for in this moment, is that food media is very open to not only the explicit publication being something that is challenging, that is really getting into a place of eliciting social change and ongoing commitment to this reality that we are living in the midst of systemic racism and all the violence that occurs from it, that we're living in systemic sexism and all of the abrupt and terrible stories of violence and harm that comes from that. These are stories that are meant to be in food media world. It's not just for other media, it's also for food media, for that to be explicit. And so I'm grateful to be one of the people that can bring that. And at the same time, really take a moment to look at not just the public facing, but also the internal work as I'm working with editors, as I'm working with people within those institutions, and offering and inviting them into a new way of relating and communicating with specifically writers of color.
Totally.
That business relationship to be much more personal and much more informed by critical race theory and many other things. We can't just use the same institution and try to weave people into it and cause more harm because the institution hasn't changed. So those are my two contributions, I guess, to that question right now in this moment.
Right. And Jocelyn, I think you raise a really good point about the internal work that you have to do with editors, right? Because you're teaching and you're paving the way for editors to challenge their own assumptions, maybe challenge how they edit a piece or how they decide to translate something or not translate something. And that makes that relationship with the next writer of color that much easier. So it is, you're right. I think it is paving a path forward. Absolutely. This actually leads into my next question. I was hoping that we could kind of talk about something maybe kind of challenging, kind of tricky. So we've all been, writing or working in food. Yes, it'll, I will get into the meat here of the conversation. So I know that as writers, we've all been writing for a long time, and we've had a chance to write about food cultures that might not be our own food cultures. I know I've written about Palestinian food, and I've written about Italian food. I've written about a variety of different food cultures that are not my own. And that can be at times a challenge. How do we write about food cultures that maybe we do not share a heritage with? Have you guys kind of wrestled with this yourselves also? Anyone else resonating here with that?
Yeah, I mean, I can jump in. First of all, I mean, the answer to that question is gently and with heart. I think anytime that you're writing about something that you're learning about, and you're writing about someone's culture that you're learning about, coming in with an inquisitive mind and being respectful and open, and also aware of your own issues, because we have them, and things that we are ingrained in us and that we've grown up with, being able to really be open to looking at those is really critical. And I also think what's really critical is really having Black editors in magazines and newspapers, because not just for representation purposes, but also because if you are white and you are writing about Black folks and their food and their culture, then it would be an amazing experience to be able to have someone who can say, why did you ask the question that way? Or why, or is it just men that you've quoted in your piece? Or why are you asking this question this way? I would find that so helpful to when I'm writing about someone who's different from me, and to be able to have that kind of support. And then also to have more writers of color in general, so that people are writing about their own cultures and they're telling their stories, and white people can just step the hell aside.
Well,
Go ahead, Andy. Sorry, go ahead.
no, I was just saying absolutely. I mean, I live in Los Angeles, so, you know, which is arguably the most diverse food city in the country. Or at least that's how the media is painting it right now. But it is incredibly diverse, which means that the large majority of the time I'm writing about a culture that is not my own. And, you know, I think a big part of it is exactly what Kim says, right? It's about empathy and curiosity, but it is about centering it on the perspective of the person who makes the food, or the people that already, or the people who've enjoyed this food because this is the food that they've grown up with, or the food that they've loved for years and years, right? So much of food writing, just because of who the gatekeepers are, and this is to Kim's point too, is that a lot of it is centered on a white person who might think that mole or xiaolong bao or jungle curry or whatever is something that's strange, or something that at the very least is messy and aggressive and something they don't quite understand, right? And the reality is, so many of these things that people find obscure are being eaten by millions and millions of people. And it's just a matter of like letting that perspective be the story, and not just be like, oh, I just discovered turmeric, or I just discovered gochujang, and this is this weird thing that's now in my kitchen, because that's not fucking weird to a lot of people, obviously.
I hear that. I really hear that. Yeah, that's very well put. I think about that too. Like, I'm thinking about like, who am I centering in this story? Am I centering like myself in this? Am I the person who's like talking about like my journey and like, you know, my experience? Or am I centering the people who are the real experts? Am I allowing them to be the expert voices, and allowing them to sort of, you know, pull their, I mean, just on a very like granular kind of textual level, like, am I putting their words in quotes and letting them sort of like shine as the people with the knowledge? Or am I, you know, kind of typing out, you know, what I sort of center myself as like an expert? So, you know, it's a balancing act with every piece, but it's something I am trying to learn to keep in mind more. I wanted to bring this question over to Jocelyn as well. I know you've done a lot of thinking about this over the years. How do you feel about, you know, when food writers write about cultures that are not their own?
I recently had the experience where I was interviewed for an article and very much thought this is being interviewed for an article, and the reporter gave me the byline. And that's an example of what Kim was saying. There is a moment where we need to acknowledge that we have centered whiteness in this country and the world for millennia, and it is causing death and harm, and so much is needing to be healed and undone. And until we really take a stance on what that functionally means for every person to stand up in that reality and shift away from that centering, we're not going to get very far. We're just not. So when I think about what it means to be in an appropriative space for myself, even, I am very much in the school of I only cook food when given permission. By that I say, as a professional, as Justus Kitchen, I very much center the lived experience of Black women and femmes. And by that I mean that's my clientele. That's who I'm here for, and that's the healing that I'm interested in. But within that actual category of peoples, there is diversity of interracial lived experience. And so someone who is Afro-Caribbean or Afro-Indian, there's this moment where I ask permission, even when we're creating a menu, to be a part of that lineage with them and be only a channel, but be very much honoring their story. The same with People's Kitchen Collective. We're often sourcing from the Great South and the diaspora. Gratefully, you know, I am only one of 3 founders. The others, one is from Kenya and India, the other from India, Bengal, and Japan and Colombia. So we have such a wealth of foundership that has identity and connection to many places in the diaspora. And so we cook from that, and if we don't, we get collaborators. We absolutely want to be authentic, and I'm really loving that word that you chose, and I'm going to get to that in a moment, with integrity when we're cooking from different traditions that may not be our own. And it's okay for people not to write an article. It's okay to say I pass. Even better, it's okay to say I pass to this very specific person. Please uplift and empower that voice in this moment. And it's okay for me not to be telling this story, because we got to repair a lot of damage that's happened, and it will be ongoing if we don't. And I love that the way that Soleil Ho, food critic for SF Chronicle, she did the top 100 list this year, and there were only 88 people on it. And it was one of the most beautiful things I ever saw, because in that moment, she made a decision to hold space for institutions that have been closed either permanently or temporarily from the impacts of the pandemic. Many of those places were POC owned. If she hadn't held the space, who would be in those spots? You know what I'm saying? That would be a moment where more well-resourced and often white institutions would fill in that space. But instead, she held it. She kept that moment of reality of our circumstances and the presence of POC-owned businesses in a list that could have simply been a different choice that she made that made those voices and those companies and those businesses invisible. So that's another way of honoring, and we can make that choice. Pandemic has shown us that things aren't impossible. We can make a new way forward. We can make a different choice that is more inclusive, more intersectional, and quite frankly, radically inclusive to this idea of what hospitality really means.
I'm really happy that you brought that up. And I think that what you're pointing to is like the restaurants that are surviving the pandemic, the ones that are like better resourced, are more white. And it sort of really speaks to the structural underpinnings of the inequality in the food system. So thank you. And I'm thanking you also for bringing up Soleil Ho, because that's one of the questions I wanted to ask you guys about. So Soleil Ho is this fantastic writer. Those of you who are listening are not familiar with her writing. Soleil is her first name and Ho is her last name. She's the food critic at the San Francisco Chronicle. And she came out with an article, I think it was titled "The Words That I Will Absolutely Not Use in Food Writing." And that was just like a fantastic read for me, and I loved it. So I wanted to ask you guys about some of the words that maybe you are choosing to no longer use or never use again. I'll read a few of the words that Soleil put on her list. She had guilt, sinful, addictive, crack, ethnic, and authentic. And so I thought that was a really, really interesting conversation. So I'll open it up to, yes, go ahead, Jocelyn. Tell me about words.
I don't want to go back, like I try to do the go to someone else moment, but before I forget, I just want to say the words elevated and refined. Woo! I know this is a children's show, so not us, but my goodness.
Me to it.
I understand, right, Kim? Like I understand the instinct. I absolutely do. And I understand the good intention, but we all know about what good intentions are. I need us to focus on this idea again, that there is a paradigm within food of highbrow, lowbrow, of the spectrum that is on a binary that is absolutely destructive. These are the things, if there's a binary, we need to know, like across the board, something's wrong. It's a bad sign. And this is one of those. When we're talking about the sources of Southern cooking being poverty food, and that being a diminutive, this is something we can change our minds about. We can decide that food is legitimate and credentialed simply because grandma thought about it and created it. It doesn't have to be within the institution of French cuisine that is held as the ultimate expression of food. We don't need that any longer. We know that that's a sham, and it's also something that absolutely belittles the expressions and the contributions of entire cultures of people. I am calling BS on that. And I want us to retool our minds and our hearts so that is no longer the case, because it is its own brutality against culture, against traditions, against the validity of whole peoples, all stories, languages, ingredients. And I'm tired and I'm done with it. So please, let's rewrite that one.
Here, here.
I know.
Yes, right. Kim, I see you resonating. I want to hear more of your thoughts on this.
Well, elevate to me was like, that's the word that has really, really just annoys the hell out of me. So I totally love that was the first word that was brought up because, I mean, Jocelyn said it perfectly. One of my questions, and I actually wanted to see what the group thought about this. So crack is on the list, and we do not, and obviously we all know the reasons why people ask Christina Tosi to like not use crack pie, but I'm really wondering why the Crack Shack exists, which is Richard Blaze's restaurant, and that no one has asked him to change his name. And I'm wondering if I always feel like perhaps that's because he's a guy, and I don't really know, but I sort of feel like there's like, I don't know, I'm just wondering why. I mean, we're clearly not calling food crack anymore, and we're clearly not calling it addictive, and we're not doing those kinds of things. So if that's the case, why is it like okay for some people but maybe not okay for other people? And so I didn't know if there was a particular reason that I had missed culturally, but
I'm choosing to believe that because that chain of restaurants doesn't really matter that much.
Oh, okay.
I'm happy to leave it at that, right? That's the satisfactory answer to me. But it's like, yeah, I agree with you that like we're well beyond the point where we should be referring to things with that word.
Yeah, I have to confess.
Can we just say why? I want to say why.
Say again.
Like we're working under the assumption that everybody knows why, but really people don't. They really don't. And I mean, an example of that was, oh gosh, what was that cookbook that was named after? Oh gosh, I'll have to do a little bit of homework on my device real quick. But there's this idea that there can be there's been many instances of using several different archetypes. One of them is using Black culture to ameliorate or to create false credential, its own version of appropriation. You know the food writer, the cookbook that I'm thinking about?
Kitchen.
Dog Kitchen, right?
It's not. Yeah, Kitchen is what I'm thinking. Thank you. I want to know. I'm okay naming that one explicitly. Some I'm not, but.
Right. Yeah. And I've written about the complications and actually interviewed them a little bit before. And, in some cases, like even took their side. But the thing that's crazy about it is I wrote that piece for a website that's owned by a very prominent publisher. I think probably their publisher, if I go back and look at it, was years ago. That story's been scraped from the fucking internet because the world changed.
Wow.
I can't even go back and look and see how fair or unfair or how stupid or correct I was about certain things because that text is gone, right? And I want to go back and look at things and consider mistakes I've made or things that I've missed. And I'm also happy to go back and look at things and say, wow, I was really smart. I understood. I asked some of the right questions. I'm just telling you that I can't do that right now because some of these things have been scraped. So there is an impact to what's changed in the last few years,
But don't you think, Andy, that's a missed opportunity? I don't want the internet to be scrubbed. I want there to be.
I don't want it to be either. I want to own up to my mistakes. And it's sort of like, I disagree with some of the things that you're saying. I'm sure if you Googled my name and Elevated, I've probably used it more than a dozen times.
Of course, we've all been there.
Right.
And I still defend that word because it's like the last time I was in the Vegas Book Festival, I think it was 5 years ago. And Brock Radke, who I'm sure some of you know, a food writer in Las Vegas, we had this discussion just about words that we used, and things were a little calmer back then, obviously. And he was just like, I like the word delicious, and I'm going to keep using it. And it was just funny because I know how hard it is because you run out of the words in the thesaurus when you write about food over and over again. Mm-hmm. And to me, some of these words, like especially ethnic and elevated, I understand why in a lot of cases you should not use those words because those words are used to marginalize. Those words are used when people are sort of confused by something or just want to neglect something or just want to diminish something. But at the same time, I interview a lot of chefs, right? And they self-identify, as their food, as someone who cooks ethnic cuisine, and they self-identify as somebody who wants to elevate it because they want to use this ingredient, to make a Filipino stew, or they want to use this ingredient to make a taco. And what they're doing, though, ultimately, is they're fighting against this other word, which is authentic. So overall, I'm willing to allow those two words, and we just completely crush this other word right now,
I think Andy's pointing out an interesting dichotomy here between the idea of authentic and elevated, right? And I think that's something that I struggle with my food writing too, is to think that something authentic is I'm trying to question and push back against, right? That something authentic is rustic, it's old, it's grandma, and then that there's this contrast to that, which is elevated French-based, Jocelyn, as you mentioned, right? That idea that something expensive has to have its roots in, France and Europe. So I think my struggle with that,
food in Europe celebrated, and poverty food in other places something that's maligned,
I agree that it's tricky when chefs talk about their own food that way, though, Andy, and I can see the struggle with wanting to give credence to how people talk about their own food, but maybe also questioning the assumptions that they themselves have about their cooking. Jocelyn, go ahead.
Right. A lot of modern,
That is it. And that is really at the heart of this moment. That's the nuance, and that's the complication of our communication and our language and how we're moving forward as a social justice movement. Not all of us are going to be on the same page when it comes to these issues, especially around language. And that's okay. But I see where I was when I was 20 years old, and I'm embarrassed by some of the writing that I did. It was so myopic. It was not informed. It had no worldview. I'm just, wow.
Been there.
Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
But this moment is a little bit different from just that, life experience thing. We're talking about having a moment of, I know that's how you're self-describing, but a lot of us are in this world of internalized racism or internalized social structure issues. So what I would like to introduce is a full description of this word as opposed to the word itself. So when someone says elevated or refined or authentic, any of these words, I would like to go ahead and interrogate that and go into that place of getting a higher word count so you can actually describe what authentic means and not just rest on the word. Right. Describe what they mean by elevate by saying this is a social justice moment where we can actually get into the complication of, I'm trying to elevate this because the social structures say that if I don't live into a standard that has been created that is centered in whiteness, then I will not be taken seriously. I want that to be the article. I don't want it to simply be resting in a description. We're going to talk about why we're using the words and what it's based on, and why that ultimately is something that is a discussion often about white supremacy.
Do you guys want to talk about any of the other words that you are either taking off your roster and making sure that you don't use as much in your food writing? One for me that I am definitely have cut out completely is the idea of guilt or sinful. Because I don't want to associate food with that sense of body image, and I've been trying to reframe food around things that are good and bring things to you and bring flavor and joy and nutrition, but have pretty much I don't think I've used the word sinful or guilt around food in years now. Anyone else have some other words that you are very consciously cutting off the list?
Can I just say one thing about I'm thinking about so I was cooking with my best girlfriend, and we were cooking her Ethiopian food, and I'm a pretty decent cook, and at one point when we were cooking together, I said to her, oh, I've got the kitfo. I've watched you do it a couple times now. I know how to do it. And I remember that she said to me, she sort of put her hand on my arm and she said, I want it to be right, so I'm going to do it. And what she said was, I want it to be authentic. Okay? So for her, I really didn't have the sense memory, the connection the sort of deep knowledge of what that kitfo should taste like. So she knew that. Even if I'm a great cook, it doesn't matter because I didn't have that like deep connection to it. So when I ended up writing something that this part of this was in, and I remember I left out, even though she used the word authentic, because to her, she was talking about an issue of authenticity. But for me, when I wrote it, I wrote that she said, I want this to be right. Because for her, the word authentic meant deep connection that I would never have. So for me, those are the things like what Jocelyn's talking about, really expressing what authentic really means in any particular context, and really going the extra mile to explain what that means to the person that you're interviewing.
Mm-hmm. Resonating with that, absolutely. Jocelyn, did you want to add anything?
Oh, just really wanting to be explicit about that was something so rooted in relationship with the person. And that feels like such a big part of this experience of writing as well. Often it is going in and going out of something, you know, a chef, a restaurant, a food experience. It's, you know, it's rather quick. And so where is it where we can get those deeper connections and relationships to make sure that how we're reading context of words and stories is really in alignment with the intention. Thank you for pointing that out. And to your question, Sonja, the words that I'm really working around right now are words around access. Quite frankly, there are so many things, including media, that are for only a specific subset of our society. And so when I think about who my audience is and who I want to reach, every time I write an article, you know, every time I'm contributing to something, I think about who has access to this, and realizing over and over again that it's a very specific group of people, and I appreciate that reach. But every time I write, I want to be sure that I'm also providing some resource, and it doesn't have to be writing. There's some resource that's being also created and generated that's super accessible to folks without technology, to folks without access to things because of circumstance of any kind. And so that's what I think of when you ask that question of, you know, that's where I go when I'm thinking about words that I use or don't use. It also is access that is given or not granted.
You hear that. Andy, what about you? Any words on your list?
So, you know, like I was saying, there are these words that I avoid. There are these words that I avoid, but it's more just, I do it sort of on a specific case because I really don't like to put rules on things. But yes, outside the context of a quote, I mean, certainly like authenticity is not something that I want to really get into, because the way that that word is used, like so many of these other words, it's really just like the enemy of creativity, right? Because it's just this limiting thing. So I just sort of think of it that way, right? If you're using any word that puts food into a box and, you know, puts, you know, and just like conveys it as something that like not everybody should understand, so there needs to be an other version of this, like that's something that I just try to never do. But again, if the chefs are really making a point, and like modernizing is another word, right? And I can see how people rail against that word, but I also understand why a chef would want to use it, and then why I should use it in certain cases.
A lot of things about food writing is just understanding the context, for sure. And that's part of why this is a challenge and an art, and why we all need good editors, right?
And to your point, I didn't mean to interrupt earlier, but I was just trying to ask a question, right? Which is a rhetorical one, because the actual answer is a terrible answer, and we all know this. It's like, I understand your desire to want to sort of explain like what the core issue of something is and where it comes from, right? But the reality is that like a lot of print magazines, the ones that are left, and I know that like those things are dying out. It's just like, okay, you have 400 words to do this. So guess what? You get 5 adjectives, and you do not get to fucking explain why those adjectives are in there. And that is the reality of the people who are trying to make a living at that. So those things are cross purposes. And that's something that I fight and I feel all the time.
And I think that's when you call the trends of firings within media. It's like, you know what? You know how that guy got fired over there? This article and me doing this is your opportunity to change the narrative around what this establishment and this institution stands for.
Right.
If you're not willing to get
more work down in print, though, right? That's the problem, right? Adam Rappaport is gone.
Yeah.
If there's a larger chance that Bon Appetit will have fewer print pages, right? So yes, you technically have unlimited words on the internet, but you also know that when you get to page, when you get to word 2000, because people know these things, like most people have stopped reading. So you've got to get these things out there, or you've got to get assignments that are entirely about this thing that you care about, right?
I'm going to jump in here so we can move on, because actually you mentioning Bon Appetit is the perfect segue to my next conversation. I do appreciate the conversation around language, and I absolutely agree that like it's a struggle with magazines. As much as editors can be a life raft and an amazing co-creator, there are times when you really do have to struggle with an editor, as we've talked about, or a word count. But on the topic of big time cancellations in food media. If any of you listeners are followers of food media, I know all of us on this panel are aware of some really, really, really high profile cancellations this year. I wanted to talk about Allison Roman. Are you guys ready?
We've been talking about Allison Roman for the last 20 minutes without really talking about Allison Roman.
Exactly. Because so just to give listeners who are not familiar a bit of a background. So earlier this summer, Allison Roman was called out online for dismissing the work of two women of color in food media. And subsequently, then I think fairly came under fire for her recipes and her work. And I would say the main thrust of the criticism is that her recipes took on sort of the flavors and forms of traditional foods from other cultures, and yet she would name them like the stew. And so the criticism was that she was appropriating these like techniques and flavors and ingredients without really paying homage to where they came from and really just cutting them off from their roots. There's actually a really fantastic article called Stewed Awakening in Eater by Navneet Along that is fantastic and takes a really deep dive into Allison Roman and sort of the struggles around that. But I wanted to ask you guys about this whole debacle. Like, what do you feel like was the problem here? Is there a way to do this right? Is there a way to, use turmeric if you're not Indian and you're cooking? So I wanted to open this up to you guys. Kim, do you want to take the lead on this one?
Okay, so what specifically do you want? Just rephrase question for me.
Sure. So what did you see as sort of the major issues with the Allison Roman debacle this summer? And do you think that there's a way to do this right, to use ingredients from another culture in your cooking and recipes that you publish?
Okay, so I think for me, just encapsulating the issue of Allison Roman and why she was called out, and I'm just going to section off the Chrissy Teigen thing as sort of a different thing, because I think it was already on people's radar before then about sort of whitewashing recipes, right? Like sort of disregarding the cultures that have created these dishes. The big question was, is the stew a curry? Who owns that? You know what I mean? That kind of thing. So for me, this is really problematic. She did bring things like tahini and turmeric into her repertoire, which isn't necessarily in itself a bad thing, but I think she definitely was using the labor of other people to create these like social media easy recipes. And I think that's where the thing that really pissed everyone off. And I think for good reason. I think that's, we really need to be careful as food writers when we talk about ownership and what's ours and what we're allowed to make money off of. And, you know, to me, it's like when somebody comes to me and says, you know, I just found the Trader Joe's, you know, spicy chili crisp. And I'm like, you know, Trader Joe's didn't make spicy chili crisp. I mean, they may make a brand. They didn't make that. Like, you know, I just get like furious, right? So I can totally imagine that when if you are like, you know, from a country where curry is like this, you know, iconic and, you know, this dish that's like a part of your culture, and you stood at your grandmother's side as she was making the, you know, and then you have like Allison Roman stepping up and like throwing the stew together, and not even like talking about the places that the influences that have like sort of brought her there. I mean, there's no wonder people are pissed off. You can't do that. You just can't do it.
Mm-hmm. Jocelyn, any thoughts?
I really don't want to talk about her at all. Like I don't want to give her airspace. I don't want to like highlight. Like it makes no point to me to talk about her. I'd rather talk about Clancy Miller doing the food culture mag for the culture mag. I'd rather talk about Teresa Nilsson and Black Culinary. I'd rather talk about Diaspora Co. and their single origin turmeric. I don't want to say her name. Like I'm done with highlighting the bad acts of people that then get more and more volume because of it. I'm going to go the other direction and empower the women of color that are doing the work that I want to be explicitly uplifted in the world.
Hear, hear. Yeah. Andy, did you want to share any thoughts on appropriation in recipes and cooking?
So I think Kim touched on that, you know, very nicely. And I think the only thing that I want to add about Allison Roman is just to talk about the backlash a little bit with Marie Kondo and Chrissy Teigen, right? The thing that was so stupid about this was like, this is 2019, and she was essentially accusing these women of selling out, right? Doing things with their brand. And it's like, it's 2019. Who the fuck cares about selling out? This is not the era of Reality Bites or Pavement or Dinosaur Jr. or some weird indie rock principle that people are holding on to, right? This is now a world, right, where having a voice and being able to sort of monetize that distinct voice in a way that sort of empowers other people and gets them to learn about things, like that's something that should be a dream, and that's something that should be celebrated, right? The idea of selling out comes from, you know, it comes from privilege, because it's like, I don't have to sell out because I can still just like live this other life, right? And to me, it's just sort of, you look at the things that she's criticizing Teigen and Kondo for, and you think about other people who have similar things. Roy Choi as a chef is probably fighting for social justice as much as any other chef. He also has a Netflix show of Jon Favreau where he cooks with celebrities. That second thing really helps him do the first thing, right? Javier Cabral in LA, he edits LA Taco. It's a site that's, you know, as much about social justice and activism and identity as it is about tacos. He also worked on a Netflix show, right? That's called The Taco Chronicles, that like celebrates taqueros and people who make tortillas. It's like, if this is what fucking selling out is, great. This should be the fucking goal for all of us right now.
That's great.
And I'm hearing what I have a linkage between what Andy is saying and what Jocelyn is saying is about like access and opportunity and who kind of comes to the forefront. Because I think that I would maybe have less of an issue with a white woman kind of making turmeric chickpea stew her brand if I also saw Indian women who were able to like have just as big a platform, if not bigger than her, talking about their foods. And so to me, there is like that mismatch. That's sort of the issue as well. Let's move on to another question because we are coming up towards the end of the panel already. I cannot believe it. So I guess we're not going to get to everything on this list, but you know, let's talk a little bit about maybe audience, because it's something that Jocelyn mentioned earlier, and it's something that I struggle with at times. So I think, as all of you know, I'm mixed Korean. My mom was Korean, and I occasionally write about Korean food. And something that I've noticed as I'm writing, I often think to myself, like, should I translate this word for them? Should I put, you know, something in parentheses? Should I, like, and I really am trying to think about, like, who my audience is. I don't want to assume that my audience is not Korean and that they would think that this ingredient is unusual or strange or difficult. But I also don't want to assume that they, are Korean, and I want to make it accessible and want people to be able to understand and learn. So I have often found myself like walking this like balancing act about thinking about who my audience is. Do any of you struggle with that also? Maybe not, or a little sometimes. I mean,
I love choosing my audience and writing to them. So as with my work with Justus Kitchen, my audience is 100% of the time Black women. And that frees me to have a really vulnerable and courageous conversation through my writing. And it tells me exactly, what is possible with the words that I'm saying, and the tone that I'm using, and the historical references that I am giving to make an impression that is really, really personal. And at the same time, choosing that audience also means that it is inherently educational. It definitely provides an opportunity to create a bridge to further research, to further investigation. I am guided by a daily commitment, again, to center something other than whiteness in the things that I do in my work, personally. I feel like that's one of the guidelines for resistance and for social change, is that we really live the undoing of systemic racism, and to really commit to uplifting and empowering women, and specifically women of color, in the choices that we make, because that's our task as voice havers and storytellers. We get to take responsibility, accountability, and ongoing commitment to really reversing what's happened to marginalized and oppressed peoples. And so that's really my focus as I enter into these conversations via, writing pieces for the public at large.
Hear, hear. Andy, what about you? Who are you envisioning as your audience when you write? And does that change depending on the outlet?
Yeah, I write for different publications, but what I try to do, and subversive isn't the right word because it's not like my editors aren't in on this and they don't know what I'm doing. But it's like when I worked for the New York Post and I covered Las Vegas, I mean, it's the New York Post. It's a tabloid. It's a right-wing tabloid. It's a super celebrity-oriented tabloid. It's got the most famous gossip page. It's like I worked on all those types of things. So I wrote about Vegas nightclubs and pool parties and all the super glamorous restaurants at Wynn and Venetian. But I also wrote about, Flock and Fowl and Eat and Sparrow and Wolf and just all these things that were just cropping up in interesting places, doing different things that were very much independent. I've been writing a lot for Robb Report, which is a magazine that's obviously for extremely high net worth individuals. And I've definitely written some stories about $200 chirashi boxes and things like that. But the first story I did for Robb Report was about a Black man in Oakland who's opening up a barbecue restaurant. The second story that I wrote about it was sort of a continuation of that piece, just about how California barbecue rivals Texas barbecue, and the people that are making it are, Mexican, American, and Israeli. And those are just the stories that I care about. It's not even that I'm supposed to trying to send any sort of specific message, but it's like, these are the people that are making the food. And I'm lucky that food allows you to tell these stories in a very wide variety of publications when people are also reading stories about $12 million houses and whatever $300,000 watches. I mean, there's a place for all of this in the world. And if I can sort of just merge the things that I care about in terms of food into lots of these different publications, I just think that the audience is the audience, but I'm just kind of writing a different version of the story that I want to write.
Nice. And Kim?
I feel like my readership really requires some patience because I tend to write really long form pieces, and I'm not a journalist, and so I write in a sort of memoir. I'm more of a storyteller than I am a journalist, and so they're expected to sort of hold the line and read through to 4,000 words. I mean, that's sort of like just the way I write. And if you don't like that kind of stuff, you're not going to want to read me. And if you only think that food is a connector and a joy, you're probably also not going to like my writing, because I write a lot about the dysfunction of food. I write a lot about people who are hungry and people who have experienced really intense bouts of hunger, sort of the absence of food. A woman who I interviewed who works at Smith's here in Vegas, who was locked in a closet and starved as a teenager. And her relationship to food, she works in a supermarket because she needs to be near food. It's a really powerful thing when you think about that period of not having food actually has altered her entire relationship to food as an adult. So I'm very interested in the things about food that are ugly and difficult and not pretty and not Instagrammable. And so I think that I require my audience to be expansive and curious, because I think if they're not, it won't be the narrative that they want.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And this is something that I hope that we see more of, as we talked earlier at the very beginning of the talk, like how do we see food writing changing? I think one of the things we're seeing is the assumption that the reader or the listener or the audience for food media is like a white dude or a white person. I think that assumption is shifting and is changing. So I hope we continue to see more of that. As a last note for our conversation, I would like to hear, and since we're talking at the Las Vegas Book Festival, I would love to hear more about either, are you working on any book projects yourself? I know a couple of you are. And also if there are any books coming out soon that you are looking forward to reading. So Kim, I'm going to start with you.
Okay. Yes. Hold on. So I am. So my list for the upcoming fall is definitely in BB's Kitchen, which Jocelyn mentioned before. I'm super interested in Xi'an's Famous Food by Jason Wang. I Cook in Color, Asha Gomez. I think that's going to be amazing. Kathy Irway, anything Kathy Irway does is going to be fantastic. So I'm very interested in those. I am working on a book project, but there's no actual word or any news for me to tell you. So we'll see how that goes.
Okay, we'll be waiting with bated breath. And Jocelyn, I know that you are also working on a book project. What can you tell us about that?
Whew. Book projects, yo. They are long in occurring and absolutely worth the process. Right now, I am working on 2 book projects. One of them is with Justus Kitchen, and it is very much, it's an exciting prospect for me. Again, not a lot of news right now, but keep an eye out for that book from Justus Kitchen that's really going into the sacredness of food, the cultural story of food, and the ecological even impact of food. And I am working on a book with People's Kitchen Collective that is turning into a 3-book kind of experience as opposed to just, but it's very much looking at a retrospective of the over a decade of work that the People's Kitchen Collective has done. And it really is talking about, that piece around building beloved community and social justice action through food experiences that are very non-traditional and very much oriented in the lived experience of Black and Brown folks. And the other thing that I'm working on is, just to give you the context, many of you know the author Bryant Terry. This is the last book that he did, Vegetable Kingdom. And it is, it's a beautiful illumination of a cookbook. But what he's working on next is called Black Food. And I've been asked to be one of the contributors to that book. And so that piece is done, and they're doing a fast track. So it'll be done They want to do that by the spring of 2021. So
Oh
that's
my goodness.
track for that one. And just really excited about being a part of those projects because it really feels like it's offering something, again, to the audience that I want the most focus and upliftment toward right now. And so it makes me feel incredibly lucky to be making books that matter to me in that way and matter to my community and to the power of the people continuing.
Jocelyn, that's amazing news. I'm so excited to hear about your contribution to Bryant Terry's new book. That is super cool. Andy, what's on the radar for you these days? Either something that you're working on, projects you're working on, or books that you see coming out soon?
I mean, this is kind of a hilarious question for me because I have no active book project. There may be some people who see this who are going to laugh and think that this is a funny question, funny answer, because I may be sort of holding up the process of a book. But there may be something in the not so distant future involving tacos that is a book that I will be involved in. So we'll see if that happens. But honestly, I'm just very lucky that right now during this pandemic that there are all these good stories and I have opportunities to tell these stories a lot of different places. So there's not even a specific thing that I really want to single out, except to point out that Zagat is doing like something that's election themed. And I'm not even really writing these because these are as told tos. And it's sort of like you were saying, Jocelyn, and what they are doing is they are just getting chefs and restaurateurs and other food entrepreneurs to tell their stories and explain why certain issues are very vital in this election that's coming up very soon. So I'm just proud to see that publications are doing that. And Kim, I'm also very interested in Jason Wong's Xi'an Famous book. If people aren't familiar with that restaurant, it's something that started as a stall in Queens, New York, and just became, what people would call a fast casual sensation. But everything about this food, from the hand-ripped noodles to just the really deeply flavored sauces with secret spices and cumin, it's just like something that takes a lot of time and love. And he managed to quote unquote scale that. And you can actually, I'm really interested to see these recipes. I think the book just came out. I haven't gotten it yet. Really interested to see these recipes because even if you order Jason's hand-ripped noodles on Goldbelly, he sends you a whole head of cabbage, right? He wants you to really do this, right? So even the Goldbelly thing that you're supposed to make in 20 minutes takes a lot longer than that because again, he's just overnighting you a whole head of cabbage from across the country. So he's obviously very specific in it. He's got very exacting standards for how he wants things to be done. His food is spectacular. I live in Los Angeles where there's supposedly better Chinese food than there is in any other city in America, but I've never had anything else like his noodles in America. So, I have to go back to New York to get it, or maybe I'll learn how to cook it, but I'm sure it's going to be a very long process to get it anywhere close. But I've got lots of time now, I guess.
Oh yeah, we've all got lots of time. So 3 cheers for Xi'an Famous Foods. I am working on a very slow back burner Korean food book project with a chef over in Korea called Buri Kitchen, BBURI Kitchen. So it's a blog and it's been in the works for years. So maybe look for that in the coming years. But it's slow going, but it's going. The other thing I'm looking forward to book-wise is a book called Crying in H Mart by Michelle Zauner. She's a mixed Korean musician and food writer, and it's a memoir about her mother who passed away and her relationship to food through her mother's passing. So she had this incredible essay out in the New Yorker, I think by the same title, Crying in H Mart, and I literally sobbed while reading it. So I've already pre-ordered the book. Really looking forward to reading that. I wanted to do one rapid fire, quick, round the circle question for you guys.
I'm so bad at rapid fire.
Well, you'll be on the spot. Here it is. So post-pandemic, we're all at a big potluck. What is the dish that you are bringing to our big, massive potluck with all the people you love and get to hug and share food with? What is the dish that you are bringing? I'll start. I am going to bring pie. Whatever's in season. Pie. Ready, Jocelyn? Go. Potluck dish.
I am connected to the idea of where I will travel next after that's possible, and that's actually Brazil. I'm really drawn to the place where a majority of enslaved people landed during the Middle Passage, and so I want to go there and meet some of my family that I've never met. And so my answer to that potluck question is feijoada.
Love it. Okay, Kim. Potluck.
Potluck is going to be so everybody can eat. Is confit bialdi, which is better known as ratatouille, and so from the movie, like little thin slices, and like I do a big paella pan so that like there's tons of it, and anybody can eat it because it's vegan, and that's what I would make.
Nice. Okay, Andy, potluck dish, go.
I am a Taiwanese Texan, and Texas chili is always my go-to at potlucks. But I visited Every Grain in Vegas, ate their Laurel Fun nachos, and got really inspired. And at one of the last potlucks I went to before the pandemic, I made mapo tofu nachos and mapo tater tots, and those were also really good.
That sounds amazing.
Isn't Every Grain amazing? Isn't Every Grain the best?
Yes. So good. All right. Well, I will see you guys at the potluck then next year.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing your time with all of us, and it's been wonderful. Hugs
Thank
to you all.
Sonja.
Thank you, Sonja.
Bye.
Bye.